The emergency shelter at Ridgeview Community Center hummed with diesel generators and hushed voices as Charles Brennan stood near the entrance, his hand gripping the worn leather harness attached to Max, his German Shepherd guide dog. Rain hammered the roof above them, while behind them, through darkness Charles couldn't see, helicopter searchlights swept across what remained of Highland Ridge, 17 homes crushed beneath 200,000 cubic yards of mud and rock. Charles had lived there 4 hours ago. A reporter approached, her recorder extended. "Mr. Brennan, witnesses say your dog disappeared 3 days ago, then returned this morning and physically dragged you from your home minutes before the landslide, that he'd been trying to warn the neighborhood. Is that true?" Charles's throat closed. His fingers trembled against Max's rain-soaked fur. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion that 14 years of blindness had taught him to contain. "I thought he'd abandoned me. I thought I'd lost him forever." His knees buckled. He sank to the concrete floor, and Max, who had just saved his life in a way Charles still couldn't comprehend, pressed his massive head against Charles's chest, exactly where he'd slept every night for 6 years. Before we understand how one German Shepherd sensed a disaster that seismologists missed, before we witness the desperate 3-day warning campaign that would save dozens of lives while costing 17 others, we need to go back 11 days to October 23rd, when Charles Brennan's carefully controlled world began to fall apart in the darkness he'd learned to navigate. Charles Brennan's alarm chirped at 6:17 a.m., the same as every morning for the past 6 years. He silenced it with practiced precision, 3 inches to the left of his pillow, exactly where his hand expected to find it. The October cold seeped through the window he kept cracked because he needed to hear the world he couldn't see. Ridgeview, Colorado clung to the western slope of the Rockies like a town that refused to acknowledge gravity, and Charles had memorized every sound it made. He hadn't seen sunrise in 14 years. The military training accident that stole his sight at 28 had also stolen his career, his confidence, and for 2 bitter years, his will to adapt. But then came Max, a 2-year-old German Shepherd who'd failed police canine certification for being too sensitive. Too sensitive for law enforcement, the trainer said. Perfect for Charles. That was 6 years ago. Now Charles moved through his morning routine with the precision his military service had drilled into him. Only now that precision meant survival in darkness. 73 steps from bedroom to kitchen. Coffee maker positioned exactly where his left hand expected it, filters in the cabinet above, grounds in the canister with the textured lid he could identify by touch alone. Max's stainless steel food dish sat at the base of the counter. Charles had broken his toe on it exactly once before learning to navigate around it. He heard Max's soft woof from the corner where his bed lay, the subtle shift of weight as the German Shepherd stretched and rose. Some mornings Charles imagined what Max looked like in those moments, the arch of his back, the yawn that Charles heard but couldn't see. He'd touched Max's face enough times to build a mental image, but he knew it was inadequate, incomplete, a sculpture assembled in darkness. The neighborhood beyond his walls had learned to keep its distance. Margaret, next door, had offered to help with groceries every week for 3 years. Charles had declined every time, his voice polite but firm, creating a barrier she couldn't cross. He didn't need help. He'd rebuilt independence one careful step at a time, and accepting assistance felt like admitting defeat. At 7:30 a.m., Charles attached Max's harness, the leather worn smooth under his fingers, the metal clips cold in the October morning. This simple act transformed them both. Man and dog became a single navigation unit, reading each other through pressure and movement, through subtle weight shifts and breathing patterns that Charles had learned to interpret like a language only they spoke. Max led him through their morning route with quiet competence, 14 blocks through Ridgeview's residential streets, 42 minutes of careful navigation. Charles knew every crack in the sidewalk by the way Max's gait adjusted, every curb by the slight pause before descent, every tree root that had buckled concrete by the detour Max made around it. His internal map of the world was built entirely from Max's movement patterns, from the pressure variations in the harness handle, from trust accumulated through 1,000 walks where Max had never once failed him. When they returned home, Charles knelt and ran both hands along Max's head, feeling the familiar shape of his skull, the softness of his ears, the warmth of living trust beneath his palms. "You're the only one I trust, boy," Charles said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of isolation he'd chosen, the walls he'd built, the connections he'd refused. "The only one who's never let me down." Max pressed his forehead against Charles's chest, and neither of them knew that in less than 24 hours, that trust would be tested in ways Charles couldn't imagine and Max couldn't explain. Charles woke at 6:42 a.m. to something wrong. Not the alarm, he'd already silenced that. Something else, something missing. The silence pressed against his ears like physical weight. Max always greeted him at 6:15 with a soft woof, the sound of his weight shifting as he rose from his bed, the click of nails on hardwood as he positioned himself for their morning routine. But today, nothing. Just silence that felt like absence. "Max?" Charles's voice came out uncertain, a question aimed at empty air. No response, no movement, no breathing except his own. Charles sat up, his hand automatically reaching for the nightstand where he kept Max's spare collar. His fingers found it immediately, leather and metal exactly where it should be, which meant Max wasn't wearing it. His pulse quickened. He swung his legs out of bed, feet finding the floor, and stood. "Max? Come here, boy." Nothing. Charles moved through the bedroom with hands extended, sweeping the darkness for the solid warmth of a German shepherd who should be there. His fingers found only air and furniture. The hallway, the bathroom, the living room, kitchen, each room mapped in his mind through 6 years of careful navigation, and each room completely, impossibly empty. The back door stopped him cold. His hand found the knob, turned it. The door swung open, already unlocked, standing slightly ajar. Cold October air rushed in. Charles knew with absolute certainty he'd secured this door last night. He checked it twice, the way he checked everything twice, the way blind men learn to verify what they cannot see. Panic rose in his chest, cold and suffocating. Max was gone. Somehow, impossibly, Max was gone. Charles tried the front door alone, counting steps the way he'd been trained. 41 from the kitchen. His hand found the knob, turned it. The porch waited beyond, 3 steps down to the walkway. He knew this. He'd done this 1,000 times with Max guiding him. But without Max's steady presence, without the harness handle anchoring him to another living being, spatial relationships blurred. His foot found the first step, then misjudged the second. His ankle twisted. He stumbled forward, hands grasping, catching the porch railing before he fell completely. His shoulder slammed into wood. Charles stood there, breathing hard, gripping the railing, feeling the humiliation burn through him. He couldn't even navigate his own porch without help. He retreated inside and sat on the couch, listening, convinced Max would return, convinced this was temporary, maybe a door left accidentally open, maybe Max chasing a rabbit, maybe something explainable. 2 hours passed, then 4. By noon, his pride crumbling like sand, Charles called Sarah, the neighbor's teenage daughter who sometimes helped despite his protests. His voice shook as he explained. She searched the neighborhood for an hour, calling Max's name, checking yards and parks and streets. She found nothing. Animal control had no reports of a German shepherd. The local shelter hadn't seen him. The veterinary clinic knew nothing. Night fell, and Charles lay in bed with his hands stretched across the floor to where Max slept every night. His fingers touched only empty hardwood, still warm from the afternoon sun that had crossed it hours ago. The house creaked and settled around him. Every sound made him jerk upright, heart pounding, thinking, "That's him, that's Max, returning." But it never was. "Where are you, boy?" Charles whispered into darkness that had never felt this complete, this suffocating. "Where did you go?" The silence offered no answer, and somewhere in Ridgeview, a German shepherd was trying to communicate something that no human could understand. The days bled together like watercolors in rain. October 24th, 25th, 26th. Charles stopped tracking which was which. Time meant nothing without Max's rhythms to anchor him, without the soft woof at dawn that structured his world. On the second day, hunger drove him out. The grocery store was 4 blocks. He'd walked it 100 times with Max guiding. He could do this. 73 steps to the corner, turn left, another 112 to the crosswalk. Charles counted obsessively, his cane tapping a desperate Morse code against concrete. Inside the store, the familiar layout should have held. Produce left, dairy back right, canned goods center aisle 3. But someone had moved a display. Charles's shoulder caught it first, then his hip, then the whole structure went down in a percussion of metal and crashing cans. Soup tins rolled across linoleum. Strangers rushed toward him, voices overlapping. "Are you okay? Let me help you up. Did you hurt yourself?" And Charles wanted to disappear into the floor. "I'm fine." The words came out sharp, blade-edged with humiliation. He stumbled to his feet, refusing hands that reached for him, and walked straight into a shopping cart. Someone guided him outside. He never went back. Delivery it was. Margaret knocked that afternoon, her voice gentle through the door. "Charles, honey, I heard about Max. I can pick up groceries, walk with you anywhere you need." "I don't need help." He sat with his back against the locked door, forehead pressed to his knees, unable to admit he was dissolving. The nights were worse. He dreamed of Afghanistan, not the explosion that took his sight, but the moment before, when the world still made visual sense. In the dreams, he could see the desert sun, the faces of his unit, the horizon stretching clear and knowable. Then he'd wake reaching for light switches that meant nothing, forgetting for one terrible second the darkness was permanent. The remembering crushed him fresh each time. By day 3, the routines collapsed entirely. Showering required too much spatial navigation without Max there to orient him. Eating meant stumbling through a kitchen that had become a minefield. Charles sat instead, phone in his lap, jumping every time it rang. Each call ignited hope. Someone found him. Max was at a shelter. This nightmare was ending. Each call extinguished it. A telemarketer. His sister in Denver. Wrong number. He considered calling the police, filing a report, making it official. His finger hovered over the numbers, but saying the words aloud, "My dog is missing, I'm blind, I can't function," would make the abandonment real, would prove that the bond he'd built everything on had shattered like glass. At 2 a.m. on October 26th, Charles found himself on the bedroom floor, Max's bed clutched against his chest. The fabric still smelled like him, that particular scent of dog and dust and devotion. His voice cracked in the darkness. "I can't do this without you." The words fell into emptiness. "I can't do this alone." The house offered no answer. Max was simply gone, and Charles was drowning in a darkness deeper than blindness. 6 years earlier, Charles had arrived at the Colorado Guide Dog Foundation like a man reporting to prison. 2 years since the accident. 2 years of physical therapy, orientation training, mobility instructors trying to teach him to accept what he refused to accept. His therapist had finally cornered him. "You can't keep living like this, Charles. You need help." He'd gone to spite her, to prove everyone wrong. Lisa Chen met him in the lobby, her voice warm in a way that made him bristle. "Charles, I'd like you to meet someone." Paws clicked across linoleum. A wet nose nudged his hand, cautious, gentle, asking permission. "This is Max. He's a 2-year-old German Shepherd who failed his police canine certification." Lisa's tone carried no judgment. "Too sensitive," they said. "But sensitivity isn't failure here. It's essential." Charles said nothing. He didn't want a dog. He wanted his eyes back. That first week, he went through the motions mechanically. Harness attachment, basic commands, indoor navigation drills. Max performed flawlessly, but Charles treated him like equipment, not a companion. Part of him wanted the dog to fail, to prove this whole charade was pointless. But Max didn't fail. He adjusted. When Charles's jaw tightened with frustration during a difficult turn, Max slowed his pace without being told. When Charles's hands trembled with the anger that lived just beneath his skin, Max pressed closer, offering warmth Charles didn't ask for. Week 3 brought the outdoor obstacle course, uneven terrain, unexpected barriers, everything designed to build trust between handler and dog. Charles had trained for combat. He'd navigated deserts and mountains with full gear and clear sight. Now he couldn't walk through a park without panic rising in his throat. Halfway through, something inside him broke. Maybe it was the way his foot caught on a root Max had tried to warn him about, or the memory of who he used to be crashing against who he'd become. Charles sank onto a bench, shoulders shaking, fighting tears he'd held back for 2 years. Max did something then that wasn't in any training manual. He lay down and placed his head directly on Charles's lap, not alerting, not guiding, just being present. The weight of that head, the steadiness of that breath, the choice that dog made to offer comfort instead of maintaining professional distance. Charles's hand found Max's ears. The walls he'd built cracked open. After that, everything changed. Over 6 months, they became something beyond handler and guide dog. Max learned to read Charles's anxiety before it spiked, sensed his spatial disorientation before Charles fully realized it himself. Charles learned Max's language, the subtle harness pressure that meant stairs, the breathing shift that warned of obstacles, the particular lean that communicated crowds ahead. Trust built in 1,000 small moments. 1,000 times Max led him safely. 1,000 times Charles followed blindly and arrived exactly where he needed to be. On graduation day, Lisa walked Charles to the exit, Max at his side. "What you have with Max isn't just training," she said quietly. "Some dogs and handlers develop a connection that transcends commands. He feels what you need before you know you need it." Charles's hand rested on Max's head. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't afraid of the darkness. He had Max. That was enough. While Charles sat alone in his collapsing world, Max was running a campaign no one understood. October 23rd, 11 a.m. Marianne Foster was leaving for her shift at the hospital when frantic barking erupted at her front door. She opened it to find a German Shepherd on her porch, wild-eyed and agitated, lunging for her jacket hanging by the door, not biting, grabbing, pulling, trying to drag it outside. "Hey, stop that!" She shoved him back, slammed the door. Through the window, she watched him pace her walkway, barking at the house like it had personally offended him. "Crazy dog," She called animal control on her way to work. The next day, construction workers at the new hillside development were securing the site when the same German Shepherd appeared, attacking their caution tape, not playing, systematically trying to tear it down, to pull the stakes from the ground. When they approached, he barked with an intensity that made them step back. "That dog's aggressive," the foreman muttered, radioing it in. "Get someone out here before he bites somebody." Dawn on October 25th found Pastor Mike unlocking Valley Community Church for morning prayer. Scratching at the doors stopped him cold, desperate, frantic scratching accompanied by howls that raised the hair on his neck. He opened the door carefully. The German Shepherd burst past him, not inside, but circling back, running 10 yards toward the hillside, then returning, then toward the hillside again, back and forth, barking continuously. Mike recognized him. He'd seen Charles downtown with this dog dozens of times. "Max, that you, boy?" He pulled out his phone, found Charles's number in the church directory. It rang and rang, no answer. Max ran toward the hillside again, looked back at Mike, barked once, sharp, urgent, pleading, then bolted up the slope and disappeared into the trees. "I've never seen an animal act like that," Mike told his wife later, "like he was trying to tell us something." October 26th, 8 a.m. Sarah Chen, the elementary school crossing guard, had worked that corner for 12 years. She knew traffic patterns, knew which kids dawdled, knew trouble when she saw it. The German Shepherd positioning himself between children and Highland Road, that was trouble. He wasn't attacking, he was blocking. Every time a child tried to walk uphill toward the Highland, the dog barked and moved to intercept, herding them back down toward town. When Sarah approached with her stop sign, he didn't retreat. He held his ground, eyes locked on hers, then glanced up the hill and back. "I'm calling this in," she radioed the school. "We've got an aggressive dog at the Highland intersection." That afternoon, Dr. James Rodriguez knelt in the mud halfway up Ridgeview's eastern slope, taking soil samples for his geological survey. His notes were technical: moisture saturation levels, structural integrity assessments, concerning shifts in the substrate. Then he added something unusual for a scientific report. Note: unusual animal behavior observed in area. Multiple birds abandoning nests, deer moving down mountain in groups. One domestic dog, appears to be German Shepherd, exhibiting highly agitated territorial behavior. Recommend continued monitoring. He had no way of knowing that the dog was Max, that Max had been trying for 3 days to communicate what the geology was screaming, that every bark, every desperate attempt to move people away from the hillside was a warning in the only language he had. No one spoke dog, and time was running out. Charles woke to weight on his chest, the familiar pressure of Max's head in exactly the spot he always chose when Charles had nightmares. For one disoriented second, relief flooded so completely that the past 3 days felt like the nightmare, not the waking. Then Max woofed directly into his face, hot breath and urgency, and reality crashed back. "He's back! He's actually back!" "Max?" Charles's hands flew up, running over the dog's head, down his neck, checking for injuries, for blood, for any sign of what had happened. Nothing. Just Max, solid and real and trembling beneath his fingers. "Where were you? Where did you go?" The trembling registered then, Max's whole body shaking, panting so hard Charles could feel the rapid expansion and contraction of his ribcage. Exhaustion, Charles thought. Whatever journey brought him home had drained him. "Okay, boy, let me get you water." Charles stumbled to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him to Max's bowls. He filled one with fresh water, grabbed kibble for the other. "Come on, you must be starving." Max didn't move toward the food. Instead, he started barking, sharp staccato bursts that Charles had never heard in 6 years together. Not the alert bark for obstacles, not the warning bark for strangers, something else entirely, something frantic. "Max, quiet! It's okay, you're home now." Charles reached for him, trying to soothe. Max grabbed his sleeve in his teeth and pulled, hard. "Hey, you need outside?" Charles moved toward the back door, the one Max always used. He opened it. Rain hammered the porch beyond. Max didn't go outside. He released Charles's sleeve only to grab it again, pulling toward the front of the house instead, pulling with force that nearly yanked Charles off balance. "Max, stop! What's wrong with you?" Charles tried the commands that had always worked. "Sit, stay, heel." Nothing. Max barked louder, continuous now, a sound that scraped against Charles's nerves. The dog moved to the coat hooks by the front door, grabbed Charles's jacket, dragged it to his feet. Charles's confusion was shifting into something colder, fear. This wasn't Max's behavior. In 6 years, Max had never disobeyed a command, never acted aggressive, never pulled without purpose or ignored Charles's voice. He was the steadiest, most reliable presence Charles had ever known. Now he was practically destroying the house, barking non-stop, grabbing at Charles's emergency bag, the one packed for power outages, and dropping it at his feet with a heavy thud. "This isn't my dog." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Something's wrong with him." But even as Charles said it, another thought cut through the fear. Max had come back. After 3 days of abandonment, he'd come back, and he was trying to tell Charles something with every ounce of his being. Charles stood in the darkness of his living room, rain drumming on the roof, his dog barking like the world was ending, and faced a choice: trust his logic or trust Max. His hands shook as he reached for his jacket. "Okay, boy, I don't understand, but I trust you." The jacket was cold against Charles's skin. His fingers found the emergency bag strap, shouldered it with the automatic precision his military training had drilled into him years ago. Preparation behavior. He recognized it even as his rational mind screamed that this made no sense. 4:53 a.m. Still dark, still raining, his dog still barking like something was chasing them both. The logical choice was clear: restrain Max, call the emergency vet, wait for help. But Charles's hands were already reaching for the harness, that leather and metal connection that had guided him safely for 6 years. Max had never failed him, not once. 3 days of abandonment, yes, but what if there was a reason? What if... Charles pushed the thought away and made a choice that defied every logical instinct he had. "Okay, boy," his voice cracked. "I don't understand, but I trust you." The harness clicked into place, and Max lunged forward so violently Charles nearly fell. No gradual acceleration, no careful start, just immediate, desperate speed. They were through the front door before Charles fully registered the rain hammering his face, before he'd mentally prepared for the cold shock of it. "Max, easy!" But Max didn't ease. He pulled harder, faster than their normal pace, faster than Charles had moved in years. Charles stumbled over the porch step, caught himself, tried to count his steps to orient himself. 73 to the corner, turn right toward downtown. But they didn't turn right. Max pulled him left, downhill, away from their neighborhood, away from everything familiar. "Max, where are we going?" Charles's free hand stretched forward instinctively, expecting obstacles, finding only rain and empty air. His feet splashed through puddles he couldn't see, water soaking through his shoes. The cold bit at his ankles. Sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer or moving away, Charles couldn't tell. The rain distorted everything, turned the world into a chaos of water and sound and Max's relentless pulling. "Max, slow down!" His lungs burned. When was the last time he'd run? His spatial sense was completely gone. He had no idea where they were, how far they'd come, which direction they faced. Just darkness and rain and Max's harness yanking him forward through both. His foot caught on something, a curb, a root he couldn't tell, and he went down hard on one knee. Pain shot up his leg. Max didn't stop. The harness pulled, dragging Charles forward until he scrambled back to his feet, gasping. "Max!" It came out more plea than command. But Max was beyond commands now, beyond everything except this singular purpose that Charles couldn't see, couldn't understand, could only follow blindly into the storm. Thunder rumbled overhead. Or was it thunder? The sound felt wrong somehow, too continuous, too deep. Charles's military instincts were screaming warnings he couldn't interpret. His logical mind was declaring this insanity, but his hands gripped the harness tighter and his feet kept moving. "Whatever you're doing, boy," he gasped into the rain, into the darkness, into the trust that was all he had left. "I'm with you. I'm with you." Max pulled him faster into the unknown. Max dragged Charles into chaos. Voices overlapped, radios crackled, engines idling, the unmistakable sound signature of emergency response. Charles's rain-soaked confusion began to crystallize into understanding even before the hand grabbed his arm. "Sir, are you from the Highland area?" A woman's voice, urgent but controlled. "We're evacuating residents." "What?" Charles tried to orient himself, failed. "Why? What's happening?" "Landslide risk. Heavy rains have destabilized the hillside. We're moving everyone to safety." The words hit like physical blows. Landslide. Hillside. Charles's house sat at the top of Highland Road, directly beneath the slope. His mind reeled, trying to process Max's 3-day absence, the frantic return, the desperate pulling through the rain. Max knew. "Come on, sir, let's get you inside the community center." The volunteer tugged gently at his elbow. Max didn't move. After nearly an hour of relentless pulling, he finally stopped, planted himself, solid as stone, pressed against Charles's legs. The frantic barking ceased. In its place, a low whine, watchful, waiting. "Sir, we really need to—" 5:19 a.m. Charles heard it before his mind could name it, a sound like thunder, but wrong. Thunder broke and faded, this built, continuous, growing. The ground trembled beneath his feet. Someone screamed. The sound grew and grew, a roar that swallowed the rain, swallowed the sirens, swallowed everything. Trees snapping like gunfire, earth tearing with a wet, massive rip. Boulders the size of cars, crushing everything in their path, with impacts Charles felt in his chest. The landslide crashed through Ridgeview's Highland neighborhood with the force of a freight train. 200,000 cubic yards of mud and rock and debris and lives, all of it pouring down the mountain in a catastrophic avalanche of destruction. Charles stood frozen in the community center parking lot, rain soaking through his jacket, Max pressed solid and warm against his legs. The sound went on and on, 30 seconds, 40, a full minute of the earth devouring itself. Then, worse than the sound, came the silence after. Rain, sirens resuming, someone sobbing, but beneath it all, the terrible absence where a neighborhood used to be. Charles's legs gave out. He went down to his knees in the wet asphalt, and Max was there, pressed against him, solid and real and alive. Charles's hands found Max's fur, soaked, muddy, trembling, and buried themselves there. "You knew," his voice broke. "You tried to tell them." Max whined softly, licked Charles's face, salt and rain and dog. "You tried for 3 days." His voice was shaking now, shaking so hard he could barely speak. "You tried for 3 days. You tried to save them all." Behind them, emergency responders were mobilizing, rushing toward the devastation. 43 homes gone. Charles's home gone. How many people, how many neighbors who'd offered help he'd been too proud to accept? Charles pressed his forehead to Max's, hands gripping fur like a lifeline. Max, who'd disappeared trying to warn people who couldn't understand. Max, who'd come back for him when he could have stayed safe. Max, who'd dragged him through the rain because trust was all they had left. And it was enough. It was enough. "Good boy," Charles whispered into the silence after the world ended. "Good boy." The investigation took 3 weeks to piece together what Max had known in his bones. Geologists traced weeks of rainfall saturating the hillside soil, creating a perfect storm of catastrophic instability. Fracture lines, groundwater seepage, structural collapse inevitable. The science was clear in hindsight. But the timeline revealed something the geology couldn't explain. Max's 3-day campaign mapped with precision to every report of an aggressive dog. Marianne Foster's front door, trying to evacuate her. Construction site caution tape, trying to shut down the development. Pastor Mike's church, attempting to rally help. The elementary school, blocking children from walking into danger. 17 people died. 63 survived because Max's increasingly frantic behavior finally triggered emergency response. Dr. Sarah Winters, an animal behavior specialist from UC Davis, spent 2 days interviewing witnesses and studying the evidence. Her report was definitive. Dogs can sense geological changes humans can't. Vibrations, electromagnetic shifts, even changes in groundwater composition. What makes Max's case extraordinary isn't that he sensed the danger, it's that he demonstrated sophisticated intelligence in attempting to communicate warnings through the only methods available to him. He didn't just save his handler, he tried to save everyone. 6 months later, Charles stood before Colorado's Emergency Management Committee, Max sitting calmly at his side. The room was packed. Legislators, emergency responders, media. Charles's hand rested on Max's head as he spoke. "I thought he'd abandoned me," Charles said, his voice steady now. 3 days alone, I was convinced the bond we'd built had broken. But Max wasn't abandoning me. He was trying to save everyone. He never stopped being my guide. He just had to guide all of us. He paused, feeling Max's breathing beneath his palm. "We need to understand that animals possess intelligence we can't measure, perception beyond our understanding. If we'd listened, if we'd had systems in place to recognize what Max was trying to tell us, 17 people might still be alive." The committee voted unanimously to establish Colorado's first disaster response animal training program. Max received the state's Medal of Valor in a ceremony Charles attended but couldn't see, though he felt every word of the citation, every hand that reached to touch Max's head in reverence. Now Charles trains other handler teams twice a week, teaching them about trust without understanding, communication beyond language, bonds that transcend the senses people depend on. Max, at 8 years old, demonstrates for the new dogs, his movements still sure, still purposeful. On the first anniversary of the landslide, Charles stood at the memorial, 17 names carved into stone he couldn't read. Max pressed against his leg, and Charles knelt to address the families gathered there. Some bonds are stronger than sight, stronger than words, stronger than what we think is possible. His hand found Max's head, that familiar weight, that steady warmth. Max couldn't make us understand, but he never stopped trying. That's what love does. It never stops trying. Rain began to fall, soft and steady. Charles stood, Max's harness in his hand, and together they walked back through the darkness. Not despite their bond being tested, but because it had been tested and proved unbreakable. Some lights, Charles had learned, shine brightest when everything else goes dark.